All right, welcome to this brand new project and also a way to learn something that you're just going to use all the time. So I cannot stress the importance of this particular video, and that is the Greensock Animation Platform, or GSAP's timeline. Okay, so here I am in the Figma document for this particular project, and this is all I designed. Literally 4 elements. There's a rectangle here, and here. They're all even, split into 3 different rows, different colors, and then we have just this fake little logo for a fictional business called Oceana. My intention for this is just to create, a quick boilerplate design with no animation, and then we'll just use our imagination about how we can create a cool timeline-based or sequence-based animation that kind of just introduces this loader graphic or this graphic. So this could be at the beginning of a website or something like that. If it's a website that's heavy in assets and it needs a preloader or something, you'll be able to take what you learn here and apply it to so many other different concepts though. So let me show you what I came up with in the browser and what we're going to essentially code here from scratch. And if I get the browser up, here it is. Now, this is the actual project we're going to be starting with. Let me get open the finished version, which should load up any second. There we are. Here it is. Okay, so let's refresh that and look at it a couple more times. So when we refresh, you're going to see those 3 different rows kind of fall into place. And then you're going to see at the same time the Oceana graphic kind of come in and wobble in from a mask. And then you're going to see the top and then the bottom rectangles kind of shrink, where the middle one expands, and then the logo falls into place. It scales down a little bit. So watch it again. And expands and shrinks. One more time. Now doing this all with GSAP to and from to is completely possible, but you're going to have a lot more code and it's going to be a lot more difficult to manage, and that's where the utility of the timeline comes into play. So I'm going to go ahead and scale down. This is the beginning state of the project. So we already have the HTML, and again, so far the HTML is so simple. I'm just having it out of the gate already, so we're going to have to code it from scratch. We just have a fade container, which is a parent of those 3 elements that are fade 1, 2, and 3, those 3 rows. And then we have a div class mask with the h1 inside of it, and that's all we have for our HTML. That's super simple. For us, our CSS, again, there's hardly any rule sets here, just a few. Our mask, because there's only one mask element, I'm just taking this one and I'm utilizing these few different parameters here, or these properties, to position absolute and then top left transform. These values work together to take an absolute position element and center it vertically and horizontally within the browser. We also have our fade container, which houses, it's the parent of those 3 elements. So we're using grid. Grid template rows repeat 3, 1 fractional unit. That means all 3 of them are going to be the same exact height no matter what. There's only 1 column here, so that's just 1 column, and a height of 100 viewport height. Additionally, we have each of our little elements that are differently colored blue shades. Notice how I am commenting this out, and I'll tell you why in a second. Transform origin top for when we scale things, changing the colors here, and then the H1 element, we're also uncomment. We have a comment here where translate X is negative 100% to get it out of the way. So with that said, what this project looks like, this is what it looks like. There's no animation because we don't have JavaScript yet, and this is basically the endpoint. But in order to avoid that flashing of unstyled content, or FOUC acronym, we're going to take our H1, transform translate X negative 100%. We're going to get it off the screen. And then also same thing with these different transform elements. Those 3 rows of differently colored blue shades are going to be scale Y 0. So we're scaling it on the Y axis, which is vertical, to 0. Then that's going to be the starting point. So now if I go back here, you're going to basically see nothing because the background of the page is white by default. All 3 of those elements are scale Y0, and then also we've shifted off out of view the H1 element. So with that being said, that's our starting point. Let's go ahead inside of our script area and let's start creating our very first timeline. So the way we do this, we're going to say const timeline equals gsap.timeline method. This is the first time we're using this. And then you can just leave it just like this. So you've created a reference to a timeline in the name of a variable called TL. You can call it whatever you want. We also will be adding some default properties which will apply to the entire timeline. So the timeline is very similar to and from, except it just allows you to organize your various animations in kind of like a timeline-based sequence. So you're still used to and from to, but it's within the context of a timeline that's defined right here. Okay, so let me show you what that looks like. We have to think about our steps. What's going to occur first? Well, I want those 3 elements that are currently scale y0 to be scale y1. All right, so how do we do that? Very simple. We say timeline and then 2, okay? Because we're going to a different state and we already defined the from state in our CSS. So we're gonna say 2, and here's what's really cool about the to method. I think you know this already. I'm not sure if we used it yet, but in the selector, the very first parameter, you could put in an array to select multiple elements. So in our case, we want to select fade 1, 2, and 3, which is right here above. So we wrap it in brackets like an array, and we simply say fade 1, fade 2, and fade 3. There we go. Now the following will apply to all 3 of those elements that apply up here. So what would we say? Well, we say scale y1. If we hit save, there we go. They all come in at the same time, and it works quite well. So what if we want to do stagger? We can stagger those, maybe at 0.2. So let's save that. Let's go back, and look at that. It looks a little bit more interesting, more dynamic when there's a 0.2 second delay between each one going from scale y0 to 1. All right, awesome. So at this point, we've done nothing different than what we've done before, except we have this weird line, GSAP timeline at the top. Okay, so what really starts to separate this is when we can chain these together. So for instance, if I tab this in, it says timeline, then we have 2. We can add, as long as we don't end it with a semicolon at the very end, right there, we can go ahead and add another 2 or a from to method right afterwards. So let's say we want to have that h1 element come into view. So we can say 2, and we'll say h1, and we're going to say x0. Because remember, right now, if we go to h1, to translate x is negative 100%. And all we have to do here in our GreenSock animation platform coding is just put x, and we put 0. So let's just see what that looks like by default. Okay, so what happens is it will wait for this animation, however long it takes, to be complete before it initiates this code here. So if we take the duration and make it 3 seconds, then it's going to wait the full 3 seconds for this animation to come into place. So hopefully that's very clear. It's a pretty simple concept to understand. So first this happens, and then second this happens. Okay, now let me show you something that's very cool. What if we wanted to have this animation right here? What if we wanted it to start earlier and not wait the full time for this one to complete? Well, very simple. Right here, after the second argument, we could put a third one with a comma, and we put it in quotes, and we could put, if we wanted to start earlier, we put a negative equal operator. If we wanted to start even later, we could do a plus equal, which would mean there would be a delay before it starts. So we wanted to start sooner, so we're going to say minus equals maybe a half a second. So when we do that, you're going to notice it's not going to wait for all of them to come into place. It's going to start exactly a half a second earlier than it would otherwise. So now things are looking a little bit better and more aligned with each other. Okay, so we can also specify a custom duration for each one of these, as we've seen. So if we make that 2 seconds, it's going to take a little bit longer. That looks weird. However, when paired with an ease, we can say elastic out. We'll say 1 and 0.5. And I suggest tinkering with these two values to see how it affects the animation. So now this looks really cool. And we're able to make it very dynamic and interesting looking with little adjustment, a little code essentially. All right, so next one, let's add another one. Let's take 2, and we're going to select our fade 1 element, and we're going to specify scale Y 0. All right, so let's see what happens here after this one. This one at the top should just do scale Y 0. There it goes. So it waits at the end. Let's add another one. We're going to say 2. This time fade 3. It as well will be scale Y 0, which we could have just added a array to select both of these if we wanted them to be exactly the same. However, if I hit save and we watch this animation take place, they both go up and transform up like that. I don't like that. For me, I want that one the transform origin to be bottom, so that the top one goes up and the bottom one goes down. So the way we affect that is we tie into the transform origin property, which is a CSS property, transform origin. Remember, we're doing camel case here, and we just say bottom. And make sure we put a comma there. So if we save it, there we go. So now that one came down, it slid down. All right, now I want those two things to happen at the same time. So I'm going to put an offset on this one, and it's going to be negative equals 0.5. Now they should animate out at the same time. There you go. Very easy stuff. It's very exciting how dynamic this is and how much control we have over it. So let's also take our fade 2. When those ones are fading out, we're going to make that one fade, or not fade out, but they scale out to 0. We're going to make the middle one expand all the way out to the entire viewport height. So what we'll say is 2, and we're going to take our fade 2, which is the middle one, and we're going to say height 100 viewport height. Now, if I save this, and again, this doesn't have an offset, a time offset yet, so it's going to wait for those to finish. If we want it to happen real close, we can just do another offset. If we want it to happen at the same time, we could do negative 0.5 again. All right, now you still do see a little bit of a separation or a gap between the two, which is fine. And then the final thing we'll do is just do a 2 on our H1 element, and we're going to make a scale of 0.6. All right, so we're shrinking the size of the logo, and we're also going to do another negative offset of 0.5. So let's see what this looks like. Very, very cool. I like that a lot. So what's really cool is we also have defaults. So we can specify those defaults in the timeline up here. And the way we do that is we wrap it in an object. We say defaults with a colon, and then I want to make sure you can see this, another object where you have your default properties. So you could do stuff like specify a custom default duration, and then you could also do a custom ease. So let's do a custom ease of power 4 in out. And again, just look at the eases page for GSAP 3 for their little editor that shows you how to work with this. All right, let's also give ourselves a custom default duration of 0.5 seconds. All right, so let me make sure this is all working. If I put 0.1, okay, so we can really see it now. Like if I put 0.1 seconds, notice how fast everything has moved, which I think is just a little bit too fast. So if I change this to like 0.4, let's refresh here from the beginning. I like that even better. So as you can see, you have a tremendous amount of flexibility in each one of these to or from to methods within the context of the GreenSock Animation Platform timeline. And with this timeline, we're able to create really complex stagger-based and interesting animation sequences, which we're going to be using a ton of going forward.